What I want to do is spend just a little bit of your time going through a bit of a presentation that we pulled together that really deals with the kind of backdrop that we're facing during this, horrible pandemic and these difficult economic times. So I am going to quickly share my screen, and we're going to talk a little bit about meeting the moment. Right now is our moment, and we need to raise the revenue so that we can fund our future. So right now, New York State is ranked number 5 in terms of unemployment. We have about an 8.1% unemployment rate, which, sounds high because it is. A year ago, in December 2019 through December 2020, New York State has lost 1 million jobs. We're down about 10% in terms of overall jobs. The largest share of those being in the leisure and hospitality industry of around 366,000, then education and health at about 157,000. But really, no one's been unscathed by this. We should also note that about 98% of the people that lost their jobs during this pandemic, 98% of those folks are making less than $68,000 a year. So this is not a problem that's affecting very wealthy families throughout the state. This really is a problem that's been affecting working people in New York. And we're also ranked number 2 in terms of COVID deaths, right? We've had 45,000 of our fellow New Yorkers die as a result of this pandemic. And certainly we've seen the great racial and social disparities that exist during this period, right? We know that people of color are literally twice as likely to die of COVID in our state, and that should be unacceptable as well. And sadly, we're number 1. We continue to be number 1 in income inequality, right? That's the gap between those that earn the most and those that earn least in our state. And we've had that dubious distinction for quite some time now. Despite the fact that many of us have been fighting on this front for a really long time. We should also talk about the fact that we've literally seen decades of disinvestment in New York State, whether we're talking about the Pataki era or Governor Patterson making billions of dollars in cuts after the financial collapse in 2008, or Governor Cuomo, who's really been pushing a 2% state spending cap, which has resulted in disinvestment in many different programs and services. We've also at the same time seen wealth exploding for people at the top of the income spectrum. New York is home to the largest number of billionaires of any place in the nation, right? New York City has 118 billionaires. Those folks have seen their income since the pandemic began increase by about $88 billion. Think about that, right? While everybody else is struggling, New York's billionaires have actually seen dramatic returns on their income. So while the wealth is exploding for the top 1%, sadly, the rest of us are left to pick up the pieces. Now, Ryan talked a little bit about federal aid, right? We know that now, since we have President Biden in office and Chuck Schumer has assured us that we're going to be getting substantial federal aid, and that is great. New York absolutely needs it, right? So, but the problem is it's a one-time kind of Band-Aid for a problem that's going to last many, many years. It's not going to be that long-term support that we really need. So we know that as we look into the out years, fiscal years 23, 24, and 25, we're looking at $32 billion in budget gaps for those years. So again, while we have some federal aid coming in, it's only going to help us for about 2 years. And then we're going to have to address those huge budget gaps on our own. And those budget gaps are occurring at a time when we have been disinvesting and we have long-term needs, whether it's around education or public services, public health, housing, climate, jobs, you name it. We need to invest in our communities in order to grow and prosper. So that's why we are all kind of pushing for the state to generate a sufficient amount of revenue. We could be looking at a variety of different ways to get at that revenue. We know that Wall Street is doing very well, that Big corporations like Amazon are doing exceptionally well right now. People with very high incomes, the ultra millionaires in our state, are doing very well. Um, and again, our billionaires have seen their wealth increase dramatically during this period of time. And there's precedent for doing these types of revenue raisers during bad times, right? Every downturn that we've had in the economy, or every major tragedy in the last 3 decades, whether it was 9/11 or the financial meltdown on Wall Street in 2008, um, the legislature has come together and sought to increase revenue in order to make up for the dramatic losses. And they have done so by asking the wealthy to contribute a little bit more. And we think that's certainly very reasonable. One of the problems that we face is every time we talk about taxing the wealthy, people talk about them fleeing or it hurting the economy. We know from numerous academic studies and talking to economists, folks like Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, he's the first to say during an economic downturn, you should not be cutting programs and services. People desperately need them. And it hurts the economy worse, quite frankly. So the reality is what we should be doing is pumping money into our economy. And the best place to get that money is from those who are doing exceptionally well. So I think all economists really agree that asking the wealthy to contribute more during one of these economic downturns is the right thing to do. The other issue that we're going to face in terms of asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more is that the wealthy are going to flee, right? That's what we hear all the time. Whenever we talk about raising taxes on the wealthy, the first thing you hear is, well, we can't do that because they're just going to leave New York. Well, guess what? We did it in 2009. Again, because we needed revenue so desperately. And you know what? Millionaires did not flee. In fact, the number of millionaires since 2009 has actually doubled in New York. So we went from 28,000 millionaires to 57,000 millionaires in New York. So this notion that somehow the wealthy are going to flee is really overblown. Why do people move? People move in search of economic opportunity. The wealthy have found their economic opportunity. So I'm more worried about working class people leaving this state because they can't afford to make ends meet or they're not getting the services that they need, rather than the wealthiest fleeing, right? The wealthy have found their economic opportunity and they are connected to their communities in a number of different ways. They're not going to pick up stakes and leave. And finally, I'd just like to note that we do have some serious income inequality, and the wealthiest 1% on average pay a smaller share of their income in state and local taxes than do the middle class or the poorest of New Yorkers. And that's something we absolutely have to address, right? That's not fair, it's not just, and it's not right in a progressive, quote unquote, progressive state like New York. So, when so many people are in pain and suffering, there really is no reason why we shouldn't be asking the wealthiest among us to contribute a little bit more. And I think that's what we're really talking about. We're not talking about soaking the rich, or pushing them out of New York State. We're asking them to help their fellow New Yorkers. And I would also say that it wasn't that long ago that we got 100 millionaires to sign on to a letter saying that they would not leave New York and they supported higher taxes on themselves to address this situation. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to my friend Ryan Duffy.